So last time I promised you that we would go over these terms, and guess what? That's what we're going to do. I live up to my promises, sometimes at least. All right, so let's first talk about the very first one on the list, and that is an actuator. So what is actually an actuator? Well, look at there. Well, it automatically positions the flow. So what happens here is that you can go old school. I mean, growing up, I had vehicles and I had to hand crank those windows, right? And then sooner or later we modernized and I eventually got my first power window car. I celebrated because that was like a special little treat for vehicles at the time. Well, an actuator is kind of like the power window. It is a piece that sits on these valves, and this piece can be controlled, and it can be controlled through a computer, and that means that you can be in a completely different room and you can tell the computer, I want that valve shut off, and a signal goes in and an actuator can slow down the flow, or it completely cut off the flow, or it can turn it back on, or it can turn it on, and let it go very slowly. So this is an actuator. This is what we're referring to. It's often something that replaces that old school hand wheel, and it can be controlled and automated because of that. So I'll show you pictures, right? I'll show you pictures of real things. That way you can kind of visualize these things as they sit on top of these valves. Next up is the body. So the body is the entire contraption where the fluid flows through. So the majority of the valve that connects the piping together, that is going to be the body of the valve. And again, I've got a picture, I've got a schematic I'll show you, so don't worry if you don't quite understand the verbal definitions that we're going over. Third, we got a bonnet. A bonnet is not something in the wild, wild west that we'd put onto our head. A bonnet is referred to a dome shape that sits on top of the valve. Normally, it is securing the actual flow control mechanism, so that way it doesn't break off or you don't accidentally twist or bend and so forth. So the bonnet is going to be the securing piece that attaches to the body, and the valve and the stem actually goes through the bonnet. So again, we've got a schematic. I'll show you that in just a second. Next up is a diaphragm. Now notice, hey, bold, bold, bold. Well, that probably means at some point in time they're going to show up again. So be ready for those. A diaphragm is actually on the inside of the valve most of the time, and those diaphragms are going to be made out of flexible material, and they are an important piece of some types of valves, not all, but some. And again, we'll talk about that. I'll show you some schematics of that so we know kind of what the diaphragm is and what is it doing on the inside of those valves. Next up is the flow control element. Oh, look, bold. So that probably means I need to know that. Flow control element controls the flow. Go figure. It says flow control in the name, so shouldn't it control the flow? I hope it does. And it controls it by the position that it is currently in inside the valve. So is it allowing a little stream to go through, or is this thing wide open and it's just flooding down the pipes and the valve is, completely open for that reason? Well, we've got some choices. We've got adjustments that can be made, and the flow control element is the piece that allows that to happen. Next up is another bolded term, and that's called the hand wheel. Go figure, it's a wheel and you put your hand on it. Hello, it's a hand wheel. So at the tops of these valves, sometimes, and I've already referred to it, the spigot outside of your house, that's got a valve, and you're going to turn it, turn. Well, you're turning a hand wheel most of the time. So that is a piece on top of the valve. You're going to grab a hold of it, you're going to turn it, and you can keep turning it to open up the flow and turn it the opposite direction to cut off the flow. Next up is the positioner. So the positioner moves valve stems to the correct position. So again, we'll look at some schematics. We'll identify some of these pieces and parts, but it kind of stays true to the name. Look at what it says, position. So the position is very important. Where is it located? How far down? How far up? How far turned? That is a positioner. Next up is a seat, another bolded term, and it's stationary where the flow control element fits. So it's kind of vague, and I'm not going to go into more detail than that right now, but I think that when you see the schematic of a valve on the inside, you will fully understand what the seat is and what's its purpose. So it is a stationary piece inside the valve where the flow control element fits. And finally, on this list is another bolded term, and that's called the stem. And the stem is the piece that's attached to the hand wheel, and it is often a rod, and it connects the flow control element to the hand wheel. So this is often that long rod or short rod, depending on the type of valve, that connects the little piece that you grab a hold of and turn, and inside of the valve, it will turn, but it only does that because there's this stem in place that connects those two pieces together. All right, so I think it is time for me to show you one of these schematics that we're going to be looking at that will clear up some of these definitions. And again, ta-da! I mean, I think visually seeing it, you fully understand, or I hope that you'll begin to fully understand what some of these terms are referring to. So the actuator is up here on the very top, and the actuator is pointing to that wheel. This can also be called the hand wheel, if I spell it correctly. So we've talked about the hand wheel as part of the definitions, and that's kind of where that piece is going to be. So it is the piece that you will turn and you will adjust flows if that's the type of valve that you've got, or that you will turn off the flow and turn on the flow fully. So those are the actuators. That's where an actuator would be. But those are also the hand wheels as well, depending on the type of valve that we have. The stem, I told you, was the rod. So the rod is going to go all the way down into the valve, and that rod connects the wheel up here at the very top to the flow control element. And that is what this piece is going to be labeled as. So flow control element is there. The reason they use flow control element is because it can be made up of different materials and different shapes. So we don't really have a term that we can use that's more universal than just something that controls the flow. And that's why they call it that. It is the flow control element, whatever that might be. So in this particular valve, they are saying that this is going to be a plug. Okay, so that's fine. Different valves have different flow control elements on the inside of them. They're made different, they're shaped different, they have different purposes, they have different kind of ways that they control the flow. So those pieces are going to change, but the universal umbrella is the flow control element there. The bonnet, I said not the thing that goes on your head, but the bonnet is all of the securing piece that's happening up here at the very top. So if you notice, it is kind of like a jacket that is going around the stem, and it helps the stem stabilize. It helps them from not breaking off or from bending or from warping, and very often they're going to be found on these valves. Of course, the bigger that they are, it's going to be harder for me to bend and to twist and to turn and to break, but excuse me, it's still security that they can use on the valves to prevent any kind of damage that might happen. Next up is the seat. And I said, well, okay, when we talk about the seats, what is it? I'll show you a diagram. Well, now we're talking about the seat. So the seat is the area that is stable, right? It does not move. It is stationary. That's what we said on the definition. Seat, stationary, where flow control element fits. All right, so here is the seat. And if you look, this flow control element has a particular shape. And if it gets lowered enough down into the seat area, it really can't go any further after it makes its way so far down, and it seats in that position, and it's a perfect little fit for it. And it has to be perfect because if it fully sits in the seat, nothing is going to be able to flow through. This is the way that we cut off flows. So that is the term that we are referencing. Again, this is going to change shape-wise, function-wise of the valve. There's many different ones that are out there. The flow control element's shape changes. The seat will have to change because of it, but the flow control element and the seat, they are meant to have a happily ever after marriage after they fall in love in that Disney cartoon. That's what's going on with flow control and the seat. Finally, we've got the body, and the body of the valve is pretty much the entire thing, right? So we have a body, and if you look at the way that they have outlined this, it is the whole thing, all the way around. That's what the body is. So we get flow goes through, there's an entry point, there's an exit point, and the entire contraption is the body of the valve. And that body can be disconnected and it can be taken off, and the whole valve will come out of the popping lines or whatever it's connected to. And then we can maintenance them, we can clean them, we can replace them, or whatever the case might be. Then we take the entire contraption and we install it back to where it needs to go, and we make sure all the seals and it's leak free, and then we can turn this valve back on and let the waters flow yet again. So that is the body of the valve. So hopefully that will clear up quite a few of these definitions. So the actuator, ching ching. All right, we got that one taken care of with that schematic. And in addition to ching ching, we've got the hand wheel. So that entire valve, the pieces and parts, kind of reference to the same thing. One's going to be more electronic in nature, and the other one's going to be more manual in nature. The body of the valve, ching ching. We've taken care of that one too. The bonnet of the valve, ching ching. We've got that one too in that schematic, not a problem. Flow control element, ching ching. We've got that one. We now know what that is and what that's referring to, hopefully. It's the inside of the valve that controls the flow of the fluid or whatever kind of stuff is flowing through. Next up is the seat, ting ting. And we got that one too taken care of. It's a perfect match made in heaven for the actual flow control element. And then finally the stem, ching ching. That one little diagram was able to define all of these definitions and terms that we are using. So it looks like a few pieces are still out there, the diaphragm and the positioner. So we're going to see some of these. There's only really 2 remaining out of this list. So we're going to see some of these in the schematics. But that one schematic I think was very clear. It had the majority, not all of these terms. It wasn't busy. And, some of these schematics are kind of difficult to read sometimes, but I think that one did a pretty good job. All right, so if I go back to this diagram, let's talk about flow. So if I am a liquid, okay, and I'm pumping down the highway, well, at a certain point, I'm probably going to get to a stoplight, right? Now, if you're a Wilmington driver, you probably have seen flow of traffic that does not stop at the valves, and those are the stoplights in the highway. They just boom, right on through, and they think the flow control mechanism is not really applicable to them, but guess what? Hopefully, sooner or later, they'll find out flow control is going to come woo, 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 behind them and pull them over on the side of the road because they broke the law. So here I'm a car and I'm driving down the highway and I'm going into the valve. And then I get to this piece, which is the seat and the flow control element. And I'm going to kind of slow down. If I slow down and the light is green and I slow down though, because I know it could turn red, and I can creep through, the flow does not stop, right? On the highway, the flow keeps going. It might slow down a little bit. You might not like it because it slows down so slow, but it does not come to a complete stop. Great. So as I go through the stoplight, right? I go through, I do it safely. I've got a green or a yellow, which means go faster. No, just kidding, but that's what I do. And then it just down the highway yet again we go. That is flow control. That is the seat. So the seat is going to be that position where the flow is going to kind of be measured and handled and controlled. And the flow control elements are going to be the stoplights. That is what is there to block the flow if needed. All right, so if I'm in my vehicle and I go into the valve and then I get a stoplight, well, the stoplight is because the flow control is sitting straight down on this seat, and it is a perfect fit because of that. So if it's a perfect fit, nothing can go through. The intersection is closed. You got to wait your turn. So I'm sitting there if I'm a fluid, and I'm waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, and that stoplight is still red, and that's because the flow control element is still in the seat, and it has not released, it has not moved, it is completely cut off. And then sooner or later, somebody's going to turn the hand wheel, and that hand wheel is going to open and it's going to turn, and the flow control element moves up. And when it moves up, all right, vroom, 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 and then in through the valve I go. So this is how I look at valves, and maybe, again, that helps you, or maybe, again, that shows you how kind of crazy I am. But either one of those, the majority of those terms are there, and I think that it proves a point, and that's all that matters. So as long as you're learning something, no matter how that information is conveyed, I think it's going to be worth it. Types of valves. There are different types of valves. Of course, there are different types of valves. And the reason is because there are some things that have to take into consideration when we determine what type of valve needs to be in place. Most of these decisions are going to be made by other people. Once the valves go in, like engineers. So once the valves go in, then those are going to be the valves that we are probably going to have to use from that point on. And they have been selected and chosen for a reason, and that's because they are applicable to whatever types of material that we are handling. So it's going to be my job and your job as a bioprocessing manufacturer to go in and just make sure that these valves are maintained and make sure they look pretty good. So why are there different choices of valves? Well, number one, temperature is going to be important. And again, we abbreviate temperature with a T, right? And that operating temperature, is it super cold? Is it super hot? Or is it at room temp? Those are decisions that have to be made because certain valves and the types of material that they are made out of, they have to go into this decision-making process. And we have to make sure that it is kind of going to be able to handle the material that's going to go through it, right? Of course. I mean, you wouldn't pour super scalding, boiling hot water into a very thin plastic water bottle and think that everything's going to be okay. That valve, aka water bottle, is going to get destroyed over a course of time. Maybe immediately, who knows? But over time it's going to weaken, and over time it's going to wear out, and over time we're going to have some problems. So temperature is going to be very important. Number two, operating pressure is also a thing that has to be considered when these people choose valves that go into the manufacturing line. So is the pressure like normal? Is it held under pressure? And if so, like how much? Is it like super pressure cooker pressure? Or is it just a little bit in order to promote fluid or other things to go through? So that's going to be a thing. Again, those decisions are already been made. That valve has been picked because maybe it is appropriate for that pressure that's being used. And I just have to make sure that those valves are going to be maintained the proper way. Next up, the type of control. So is it one of those situations where you can do the quarter turn valves? So do I just want a cut on, cut off type of valve in place? And if so, great. But is it one of those that a hand wheel is going to be needed? So you need multi-turn valves for those. Do I need to kind of turn in order to open and close off that flow? Maybe, maybe not. But we'll see. Those engineers kind of help us with those decisions And once more, it's just going to be my job to make sure I'm handling and I'm looking at them and I'm making observations the appropriate way. Next up, are they sanitary or are they non-sanitary purposes? So for the pharmaceutical world, most of the time, sanitary is going to be the number one driving force. The food industry actually uses quite a bit of sanitary as well. And that's because these products are going to come in direct contact with you, and you're probably going to ingest them in some form or fashion, whether it's topical through the skin, or whether it's through your mouth, or whether it's through an injection. Something's going on where you are taking that product inside in some form or fashion. So sanitary is going to be very important. We don't want you to poison yourself with the products that we're making. Or is it non-sanitary? And non-sanitary has a purpose as well, even in pharma. So not everything comes in contact with the active pharmaceutical ingredient that we were after. And if they are not coming in contact with that API, then do they really need to be non-sanitary? Or is valves in place, connected to piping, that never really comes in contact with API? If so, does that have to be sanitary, or can we get by with non-sanitary types of things? And finally, manual versus automated. Manual is me going out, turning the valve on, turning the valve off. And automation is more like control room, possibly, where we are sitting in a room behind a computer and we are clicking in software to open and close things throughout the manufacturing line. And automation also talks about the actuator that sits on top of the valves that will control the flow based on the flow rate that you need. That is automation as well. So not just a straight up cut on, cut off, but also a flow control can be automated at the same time. All right, so those are a couple of decisions that go into picking out the proper valve. And I've got one more definition before we end this video, and that is something called a throttle. A throttling valve. Sounds fancy, but it's stuff that we've really already talked about. Throttling valves deliver a flow rate that is controlled. So it is not fully on and fully off. So throttles are normally found in those multi-turn valves. And the throttle, we call it that because we control the intake. So how fast do we want it coming in and out? Or how slow do we want it to come in and out? So we need controls of those things sometimes. We even need controls of those things with very sophisticated analytical instrumentation that will be used in laboratory spaces that will be testing the product that you'll be making. So a throttling valve is very important, and it's very common. So if we are picking throttling valves, we need to make sure that it can withstand changes in flow, maybe constantly. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow, and then sometimes we have to change those very, very often. So is that throttling valve going to be able to really keep up with all the work that's going to be needed when we begin to use these valves? Next up, the throttling valves should be automated. So if I do really have to find a flow that works with my standard operating procedures, then I want to make sure that that flow is actually being measured and that flow is actually being done. So there's got to be some automation to this to make my life a little bit easier. So there's got to be some metering devices. There's got to be some software in place maybe that will control the open and the closing of all of these different types of valves. Next up, we have to make sure that they are not prone to leak, and throttling valves do a very good job of this. The way that they are built and the way that they are made, they really don't leak that much. Now they can, and we do have to maintenance them, and we do have to replace pieces and parts that wear out. But throttling valves, being able to control the flow and doing all these movements and all these changes over a course of time, they are really not prone to leak at all. But on a certain day, they could be. That could be a very bad day. Maybe it's a Monday after a really long weekend. Nobody wants that, but it can happen. So be prepared for those. Maintenance is going to be required on all of these valves. not just throttle valves, not just these rotor valves or anything else that we talk about after that point. All right. So in the next video, we'll continue to talk about valves, and the very first one that we're going to talk about is the ball form. So I'll have some more pretty pictures for you to look at, and we'll talk about a ball valve next.